It's Christ meets people where they are. So if you have your Bibles, I'd like to ask you to join me, and we would like to go to the first vision of Jesus Christ in the book of Revelation, chapter 1. I hardly see any pastor in my 40 and some years serving this church. I saw hardly anybody preaching on this vision of Jesus Christ. If we mention, that's always one agenda that we have in mind as we are preaching it. But I want to share with you how that vision of Jesus Christ in chapter 1 actually changed my personal Christian life. As a father, as the friend, as the teacher, as the pastor, etc., etc., etc. I would like one more time to remind you of the point that Dr. Musosi actually presented here, that the book of Revelation was written. Actually, it came from God, okay? I hope that we make point of that. But it was written by a pastor to the churches that he was far away from, because he was at that time on Patmos. And John the Revelator, for him it was very important at the very, very beginning to tell us something about the circumstances under which the book of Revelation was written. And brothers and sisters, if you are writing a book, or if you are making a sermon, where do you put the most important things? You put at the beginning. If I read the first 10 pages of any book and I quit reading, that book is not for me. The fact that we have here the first vision of Jesus Christ, and John the Revelator was so eager to tell us about the circumstances within which the book of Revelation was written, appear to be very, very significant. And this vision of Jesus Christ is telling us who Jesus Christ of the book of Revelation truly is. We saw him in chapters 4 and 5. We saw him in chapter 12. But let's now go to this introductory vision. And we are beginning with verse 9. John the Revelator is telling us, I, John, your brother and fellow partaker in the affliction and kingdom and endurance in Jesus, came to be on the island called Patmos because of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. I came to be in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice as of a trumpet, saying, write what you see in a scroll and send it to the 7 churches, to Ephesus, to Smyrna, and to Pergamum, and to Thyatira, and to Sardis, and to Philadelphia, and to Laodicea. I learned a lot from this passage. Who was John? He was a pastor. He had at least 7 churches, possibly more. How does he write to those churches? Keep in mind, the messages that Jesus sent to him are supposed to be read by the angel of those churches, which are really the elders of those churches. You know, there at Andrews, I have some of my colleagues, and I call them on phone to talk to them, and the answer is, here is Dr. My response is, here is Ranko Stefanovic, your friend. And I had to talk to some of my colleagues. Why is so much important for you that you emphasize that you are doctor? I learned a lot here from this text. What does John say? Who was John? He is a pastor. Writing to his flock. How is he identifying himself? I, John, your brother, and your fellow partaker in affliction. My dear brothers and sisters, God put us as leaders, but so many times we forget that when God put us on the position, in charge of those different churches and districts and conference, etc. The people that we are in charge, they are our brothers. And know how we are relating to brothers. John the Revelator was there on Patmos, as he's telling us. Among the biblical scholars today, there is a big discussion if Patmos was indeed a prison island. I take for granted what the early Christians were writing, and we are not talking about one early Christian or two or three, numerous. Actually, they testify that John was banished on Patmos, which was actually the prison island, because the Roman authorities, they did not like him, did not like his ministry, and they put him there on Patmos. I know we all are coming from pastoral background. And we are put in charge of different churches. And when we go for a vacation, for holiday, for 3-4 weeks, what happened with our churches? You know how much work we have to come back. When there is no pastor present, you know, it's opportunity always for some things to happen in the churches. Can you imagine? We don't know how much John was on Patmos. But it appears that it was very long time. And those churches did not have a leader. They lived in the pagan background there. And they confronted the challenges of paganism. If you do not comply to the social demands, you are ostracized from society. There's persecution. You don't get permission to open business, or maybe to get the work. And suddenly, in those churches, individuals appear. We don't know who they are. But in message to the church in Ephesus and the church of Pergamum, they're called Nicolaitans. They're called Balaamites. In church of Thyatira, there is a woman who appeared claiming to be prophetess with special message to God's people. And there is a common to all those heretical movements is there is nothing wrong to participate in pagan life. Does not mean compromise with God's demands. It simply means to be loved by our pagan neighbors. And the churches became split. We will mention a little bit later. Some churches were still strong in faith, like the church in Ephesus and church in Smyrna, the church in Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, even Philadelphia that we call brotherly love, as we just heard, just had a little bit strength, hardly surviving. What about Laodicea? Better not to talk about it. They were in terrible situation. And John the Revelator, he got the news about the serious situation in which those churches were located. He was on Patmos. And you will notice, when you are on Patmos, you are surrounded by waters, by the sea. That water, that sea, prevents you to go and to visit your church members. That water means separation. During the stormy hours, that water actually creates a serious trouble and tribulation to you. So John is there on Patmos. And to be, not only just on Patmos, to be a Roman prisoner, oh boy, that was a special challenge. According to Bill Ramsey, very well-known New Testament historian, he says that the hardship that the aged apostle suffered there was marked by perpetual fetters, scanty clothing, insufficient food, sleep on the bare ground in dark prison, and work under the lash of military overseers. If you cannot work, the Roman soldier will make you work. Don't worry about that. So John was surrounded by the sea on Patmos. And please, I don't have a time to talk to talk actually more about that. But there is something very significant. Since John was on Patmos, and surrounded by the sea, that the symbol of the sea and water is used 26 times in the book of Revelation, except the symbol of the Lamb that is used 27 times. Water and the sea is used 26 times. You see how God speaks to the prophet that something comes out own experience. Keep in mind, John looks there, is the sea. Is the sea. Is the sea. Is the sea. Wherever he turns is sea. The sea, it means separation, it means trouble, it means the symbol of evil, it means everything what is the worst. Because of that sea. I'm sorry, I just put in here a footnote. If you go to the book of Revelation, it is out of the sea that the beast is coming to persecute God's people. It's the stormy sea that wars against God's people. It's on waters that prostitute Babylon sets. But symbol of water also has a positive symbol in the book of Revelation. But for John, it was a symbol of evil. So now, when we go to the last vision that John the Revelator had, you remember that? The last vision, what does he say? And behold, new heaven and the new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth, they have passed away. And what is the first thing that John observes that there is no on the new earth? And no, by the way, I'm sorry, I read the Bible in Greek, not in English. And in Greek says, literal translation, and the sea, there is no there any longer. Translation that you have, there is no there any sea, implies all kind of meanings. But in Greek says, and the sea, there is no there any longer, with a definite article. Which kind of sea did John have in mind as he was writing that? Sea by which he was surrounded on Patmos. Brothers and sisters, the time has come that we stop using the book of Revelation just to make fear in people. Everything is about beasts, everything is about dragon, everything is about that our people cannot sleep during the night. Of course, all those things are in the book of Revelation, as we explained earlier. But the beginning of the book of Revelation give us a hope. I don't know about you, but even today, I can tell you, there is always a sea that surrounds me. You probably don't know. Last year, I was always 1K traveling, and last year I had many plans to travel around. And in May, my wife experienced an accident, which appears just an innocent accident. It turned into the nightmare for all of us. Now, the last year was for me a terrible event. I had to provide 24/7, 2 months my wife's service. She even couldn't go to the restroom. She was completely paralyzed. Just an innocent, if I tell you how the accident happened, you'll be laughing. And you know, I know each one of us. It's very nice we are smiling here, but when we go back to our unions, to our conferences, oh boy, I just this morning received number of emails about Sabbath School Quarterly. Everybody has opinion. Just Ellen White said. And they make the Ellen White said what they want to say. We all facing that sea. But the good news is, we have the book of Revelation, and this book is telling us that one day God will create everything new. And the first thing that we will observe of the new earth is that there is no that sea that was the cause of our suffering, our headache, and all troubles that we have in this life. Is that the good news? Yeah? That's why the book of Revelation for me is indeed the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's the good news, okay? Christians should never forget, I put here, I just want to read it, that whenever they find themselves on Patmos, surrounded by an endless raging sea, whatever that sea may stand for, they are not left alone. Let us not forget that the Patmos experience always results in the revelation of Jesus Christ. We forget. Why do we have today the book of Daniel? Why do we have? Because Daniel had to go to Babylonian captivity to suffer there, so that we have the book of Daniel. Without the Babylon, we would not have the book of Daniel. John the Revelator, he had to go to Patmos. So today that we have the book of Revelation, no Patmos, no revelation of Jesus Christ. You see, whenever we find ourselves on the Patmos, surrounded by that raging sea, whatever that sea is in our lives, it's always opportunity for Jesus Christ to come and to speak to us and to reveal His love to us. That's actually what happened to John. It was at that moment when John was in that suffering, Jesus came to visit him. And we saw in the verses that we read, John heard the words, John, write in a scroll the things that you have seen and send to those 7 churches. And you remember the churches are mentioned by name, starting with Ephesus, going to Smyrna, going all up to the Laodicea. How did John feel when he heard that voice? He recognized that voice because that was the voice that he was listening for 3.5 years. And you remember he had a special relationship with Jesus Christ, like a kid who would put his head on the chest of Jesus and he could get from Jesus whatever he wanted. And now he hears that voice. John, excited, turns around to see his Savior. What did he expect to see? That man of Galilee that he had known for 3.5 years. But actually that's not so. So let's keep on reading. It says, and I turned to see the voice that was speaking with me. And having turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands. And in the midst of the lampstands, I saw one like a son of man, clothed in a robe, reaching down to the feet, and girded with a golden girdle. His head and hair were white as white wool, as snow, and his eyes as a flame of fire, and his feet were like a burnished bronze, as it can be refined in a furnace, and his voice was like the sound of many waters. And he had in his right hand 7 stars, and from his mouth proceeded a sharp 2-edged sword, and his appearance was as a countenance shines in its power. And when I saw him, I fell at his feet as a dead person. And he placed his right hand on me, and he said, again I'm translating from original Greek. In your English Bible, it says, don't be afraid. No, in Greek it says, stop being afraid, because he was afraid already. I am the first and the last, and the living one, and I became dead, and behold, I am living forever and ever, and I have the keys of death and Hades. Write therefore the things which you saw, namely the things which are and the things which are about to take place after these things. The mystery of the 7 stars that you saw on my right hand, and the 7 golden lampstands. The 7 stars are angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 lampstands are the 7 churches. Very interesting vision. What to do with this? We already established it previously that Jesus presents himself to John as a priest in Jerusalem, in the temple of Jerusalem, in the midst of the 7 candlesticks, those lampstands, taking care of that. And we already explained that it reflected the ministry of the special priest taking care of the lampstands in the temple of Jerusalem. And Jesus explains to John that 7 lampstands represented the 7 churches in the Roman province of Asia. We already stated, please allow me just to reiterate once again. The priest was so much familiar with each one of those lamps, as taking care of them and helping them to shine brighter, and those lamps that were dying, to revive them. and to help them to provide the light. If the priest was entering numerous times every day into holy place, taking care of those 7 lamps, how many times did he enter the holy place to take care of those lamps during 1 week? How many times during 1 month? I hope that you will agree with me. As soon as the priest entered the holy place, he knew exactly which of the lamps had problems, because he became so much familiar with them. And the lamps represent 7 churches. What is one of the key words of the messages to the 7 churches? As the priest was familiar with those lamps, sure, Jesus is familiar with the situation of every church. And you can see how many times the word "I know" is used in those messages. The good thing is that Jesus knows each one of us very well. Doesn't matter which position we are, doesn't matter which our ministry is. And so many times we are praying, as I hope that you have experienced as myself. So many times in solitude of my room I'm praying, and I'm not sure that my prayer goes about the ceiling. But the good news from this vision is Jesus is telling us, I know your worst labor endurance. I know your affliction. I know where you dwell. I know your works, love, faith, service. I know your perseverance, and I know your works. That's really the good news. So now, why did we study this vision? What is so special about that vision? What is the message for us as the leaders that can come from this vision? There are actually 2 things that come out of these. There are 2 lessons that come out of this vision. And the lesson number 1. You noticed as John turns around, and when he sees Jesus, he sees Jesus in his completeness. And he tries to describe Jesus to us. Where does he begin? He begins with here, with his hair. You notice it? Where does he end? With his feet. And then describes everything what is between. So in chapter 1, we have the complete Jesus that John, the Revelator, actually sees. And please, I don't have time now to read, but we saw already, we read it in the text, the way how actually John describes the Jesus. All his attributes, all his characteristics. Okay, now, so what's the big deal? That's so obvious. But many people, when they study this vision, and the 7 messages that they come after that, they do not notice that all these characteristics of Jesus and description of Jesus that is found in chapter 1, they are distributed among the 7 churches. Okay, let me clarify one more time. It's not easy concept to grasp. The 7 messages, they all have the same outline and the same pattern. Every message begins with that, to the angel of the church in. Right. That's every message begins with that. Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, okay? What is the next element of every message? It's a special introduction of Jesus. Before Jesus evaluates the condition of a particular church, Jesus wants first to introduce himself to that particular church. He does it with every of the 7 churches. Before he makes evaluation of that church, Jesus is telling the church, let me tell you something about myself. So please, let's go quickly through this. To the angel of the church in Ephesus, thus says the one who holds the 7 stars in his right hand and walks among the 7 candlesticks. Next one. To the angel of the church in Smyrna, thus says the first and the last who became dead and has come back to life. To the angel of the church in Pergamum, thus says the one who has a sharp two-edged sword. Verse 18. To the angel of the church in Thyatira, thus says the Son of God, who has eyes like a flame of fire, and his feet are like burnished bronze. Verse 12. To the angel of the church in Pergamum, thus says the one who has sharp two-edged sword. Did I miss something here? Okay, chapter 3, verse 1. To the angel of the church in Sardis, thus says the one who has 7 spirits of God and the 7 stars. Verse 7. To the angel of the church in Philadelphia, thus says the Holy One, the true one, who has the key of David, who opens, no one will shut, and who shuts, no one opens. The holy and the true is found in chapter 6:10. And then finally the church in Laodicea, to the angel of the church in Laodicea, that says the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the beginning of God's creation. There are 3 things that we should observe with regard to this. Number 1, all the characteristics of Jesus by which Jesus introduces himself to each church individually. Where are those characteristics taken from? They're taken from that original vision of Jesus in chapter 1. Are you friends with me? Amen. We have in chapter 1 Jesus there. And Jesus takes some of his characteristics and he introduces himself to the church in Ephesus. Then he takes some of his characteristics and he gives to the church in Smyrna. Then to the church in Pergamum. Okay? So what can we observe? When we put all those introductory descriptions of Jesus in messages to the 7 churches, when we put them together, what do we have? We have the complete Jesus of chapter 1. Okay? That's very important to keep in mind. All the characteristics of Jesus from the composite picture in chapter 1 are distributed among the 7 churches. But we can notice something else. No church gets all the characteristics of Jesus. I'm sorry, friends. At Andrews University, we have the best scholarship in the world. I'm sorry. Except me, everybody else. So Andrews does not need anybody. Because we have the full grasp of Jesus and the plan of salvation. No. We are just one component in the church. We have just one aspect of Jesus, understanding of Jesus. That's the reason I want to be in the field. I get completely different aspect of Jesus Christ. When I go to different parts of the world, then I get another aspect. Because there is no Christian, there is no church, there is no conference, there is no union that has a full grasp of the plan of salvation in Jesus Christ. We only just get that aspect of Jesus that fits our needs, our circumstances, our cultural context within which we live. That's why we need the worldwide church. We need each other. Doctors, they need pastors. Pastors, they need educators. Educators need administrators. We need editors of publishing. We need each other. And it is only when we are together as the church, we have the complete understanding of people. I apologize, friends, what we are saying. When black and whites are together, then we have understanding of Jesus. When Serbs and Croats in my country are together, then we have better understanding of Jesus and his love. When you are by yourself, that's not love. According to the Bible, that's egoism and selfishness. Only when we are together, when we share that aspect of Jesus, that Jesus worked within me, within my circumstances, then Jesus is completely revealed in the midst of his people. Another thing is that we have no church gets all the characteristics of Jesus. But there is another concept here. There are no 2 churches that they receive the same characteristic of Jesus. Did you notice it? You can compare for yourself. There are no 2 churches that they receive the same aspect of Jesus. The question is, why? The answer is because the characteristics of Jesus given to a particular church corresponded to the situation and needs of the church. There are no 2 churches that are completely 100% in the same situation and plight. Each church is its own circumstances and situation. And Jesus comes to the church as the Jesus of the church. Did you notice something? When Jesus comes to the church in Ephesus, he comes to the church in Ephesus as the Jesus of the church in Ephesus. He doesn't come to the church as the Jesus of the church of Laodicea. When Jesus comes to the church in SID, he comes as the Jesus of this division. But so many times you like to have Jesus of America. Their evangelistic way, how they're working, are you still with me? And I like yesterday what you made. The time has come that we say about our experience by ourselves, not that other people talk about us. Wherever I travel, there are advocates that are coming to me. You know, you heard about Jesuits at Andrews. You heard it about that. There are people teaching me what's going to Andrews. They never been at Andrews. They never heard anything about, but they know everything about Andrews. I try to explain to them, I know nothing, but they know everything. See, this is the problem. This is the problem is when Jesus comes to us as a Jesus who works for me. Jesus who wants to change my circumstances. Jesus who wants to bring me in his closeness and to bring me into that salvation so that one day I can share with Jesus that throne as he overcame and share with his Father his throne. And Ellen White's statement, it changed my life completely. Christ needs people where they are. Let's just go quickly. Oh boy. In Tanzania, the clocks are going very fast. Okay, Ephesus is threatened by false teachers and is losing the first love. Jesus comes to that church as the one holding the 7 stars in his right hand, who walks in the midst of the 7 golden lampstands. He's the one who has full control over the church, which is in danger of losing her place as a lampstand. The church in Smyrna is going through dire persecution. To these suffering Christians, Jesus presents himself as the one who himself once was dead and came back to life. So he assures them that he himself has experienced what they are presently going through. So he gives them a promise of resurrection. And then please, I have to skip this. The church in Pergamum, I will give you these PowerPoints. You can see for yourself the church in Sardis, church in Philadelphia, but we cannot miss the church of Laodicea. The church in Laodicea is in such extremely bad condition that Jesus has nothing good to say about the church. To this lukewarm, self-sufficient church, Jesus comes as the faithful and true witness and the beginning of God's creation. His discerning testimony exposes the true condition of this church, and his creative power to bring something from nothing is the only hope for this half-hearted and lukewarm, yet loved by Christ church. So to each church, Jesus comes as one who. So the situation here in Revelation 1-3 looks like similar to what we observed with regard to the 4 Gospels. Why do we have 4 Gospels? I'm a New Testament guy. So many times I say, Lord, why didn't you give us just 1 Gospel? And I will not read in Gospel of Matthew how 2 demon-possessed in gatherings attacked Jesus, and read in Mark how only 1. And my students ask me, I don't know what to say to them. I have explanation. No, teacher knows everything. You explain everything. But we have a problem. If we have 1 gospel, we would solve all the problems. Would we? You see, we have 4 gospels because 4 gospels were written to 4 different kind of people. They're not simply written to be the historical accounts. They're written to tell us that there is a Jesus for Jews, Gospel of Matthew. There is the gospel for Gentiles, the Gospel of Luke. There is the gospel for those who are suffering. And the question is, if tomorrow they will be alive. That's why we have the Gospel of Matthew, and 40 times he uses the word suddenly, 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 or immediately, immediately, immediately. Because when people are dying, you don't preach long sermons, huh? Okay? And then you have the Gospel of John, the Gospel written for the second generation of Christians who did not have that original personal touch with Jesus. That's why we need 4 Gospels. Even we don't like it so much. The same situation is that actually we have here is because the major problem with many Christians today is that Jesus that we believe, it's not my Jesus, but always the Jesus of somebody else. It's the Jesus of my parents, Jesus of my spouse, the Jesus of my pastor, the Jesus of the church elder, and some popular evangelist who instructed me, brought me truth, and I'm staying on that level. Everything what I know is about what Jesus presented to me from their personal experience. But I know everything about Jesus, but really, I don't know Jesus. I don't know him from my personal experience. To know about Jesus Christ does not mean to know him personally. And please, maybe next time when I come, I'll tell you my experience, how this vision changed me to be better father, to be successful student. You see how heavy accent I have. And the dream at Andrews is for professor to become a teacher of the year once in 40 years of their teaching career. I had 4 with my heavy accent. Ask why? Okay, there is the answer for that. But why all those things is? Because I learned this. I have nothing to change people. I have nothing to teach them. I can only share with others what Jesus did for me, for my personal life. And learn from me, don't copy me. But you have to establish your personal relationship with Jesus Christ, because the same Jesus who was able to change me, and he was able to change me, he can also do the same to you. That's what I was doing with college students. At the end of every semester, Pastor Dwight Nelson knew always. At the end of the semester, I called him, Dwight, I need 10 minutes for baptism of my students from my classroom. They're challenged. They understand the gospel is not something that is mine. I try to impose upon them that the gospel is something that changed me. The same gospel can do with them. And I know that some of those students, sorry I'm preaching to you, they were a headache to me, pain in the neck the whole semester. I said, Lord, can you make him sick not to come to the classroom any longer? And they leave Andrews. And then after 5-10 years, you receive a letter from the elder of the church, and you recognize the name who was a pain in the neck to you in the class. He said, Professor Stefanovic, I know what I did in your classes, but your experience with Jesus Christ touched my life. I did not forget it. I just want to tell you this. God changed my life. I said, yes, that's the point. That's the Jesus Christ that we need. And that's the Jesus that the beginning of the book of Revelation introduces and telling us that we have to follow his example. Lesson number 2. There is much more to be said. Every message begins with special introduction of Jesus. And we saw the significance of that. There is much more to be said, as I said. But every message actually concludes with the promises that Jesus gives to every church. And I'd like to conclude with this. This is what I would like to share with you, to leave with you as I'm going through the door to go back to my home. And believe me, my wife is waiting for me. I'd like, before we talk about promises to the overcomers, I want simply, just with brief points, to tell you something about those churches. When you read the messages, you will notice that the best church of those 7 was the church in Ephesus. And believe me, one day if you have to choose the place where to be pastor, you would be happy to be the pastor of the church in Ephesus. That's the church. It's very strong in belief and teachings. Cannot stand false teachers. There are tribulations, crises in their lives, but they are faithful to God, and they do not deny God's name. They have one problem, and what is the problem? That love, first love that they had, somehow stagnates, but it's still faithful church. You see, it's on the top. The next church is the church in Smyrna, still very faithful to God. But the church lives in constant fear. Fear of the present circumstances and what might come, and this is very often product of imagination. You know, when you say what may happen in the future. So they live in constant fear. Sometimes it's very difficult to work with those people. The next church going down is the church in Pergamum. Or the church has already serious presence of apostasy in the midst. But still, the majority are faithful to God. The next church in Thyatira, it's half. It's divided church. The church, even general status of the church is better than the beginning. But there is the presence of terrible apostasy in the church going down. The next church in Sardis, Jesus says that church has the name to be alive. It's completely dead. The church has the name, but the condition does not coincide with that name. The next church in Philadelphia, Jesus says, has just a little strength. Jesus promises the door of opportunities, but this church hardly surviving. And then the last church, the church of Laodicea. Any comment necessary? Jesus has nothing good to say about this church. And please, this is my final appeal that we see what we have here. To each church, Jesus gives a number of promises to help them in that situation. So please now, you don't need to look your Bibles. I will put here in the screen. You see, along with the evident spiritual decline in those churches, from Ephesus going down, there is an increase in promises that Jesus gives to those churches. As each church is in decline in comparison with the preceding one, each receives more promises than did the previous one. So please, can you now cooperate with me? Okay? For the end, you have to leave good impression. Okay, well, let's go now. How many promises does the best church receive? It's one, the tree of life. And you have verses there. You'll be able to check it for yourself. The church in Smyrna, second church, how many promises does the church in Smyrna receive? 2 promises. The third church in Pergamum, that is down now. How many promises does the third church receive? The fourth church in Thyatira, which is really divided church, how many promises? 4 promises, and you have them there. The fifth church in Sardis, which is really dead church, just has the name to be alive. How many promises does the fifth church receive? The sixth church in Philadelphia, hardly surviving, little strength. How many promises does the sixth church receive? And the seventh church, the church in Ephesus, how many promises? Oh, now you are quiet. Come on, I told you, you have to leave good impression in the last moment. Only one promise. And which is the promise? Everybody who overcomes will sit with me on my throne as I overcame and sat with my Father with his throne. What would you choose? If there is a rich man comes here and tells you, hey, friend, I really like you. I will give you $1 million. I will buy a good mansion for you and very good Mercedes I will buy for you. It's yours. But you have an option. You can choose. I can adopt you as my son. So everything what I have belongs to you. What would you choose? You see, friends, when you sit with Jesus on his throne, then you have all other church promises that are given to other 6 churches. The worst church, the church of Laodicea, where you you and me are belonging to. The church that so many times, they are experts to criticize always, to point fingers, etc. And rightly you can point fingers. But Jesus does not point fingers. Jesus gives the promise of promises. And telling the overcomers in the church, one day, I promise, you will sit with me on my throne. So then everything what belongs to me, it will be also yours. And Paul is talking how by having salvation in Jesus Christ, we have all inheritance that actually Jesus has. By the way, in reality, this promise, to sit with Jesus is, and this is important. This increase in promises, along with the spiritual decline in the churches, brings to mind Paul's statement that says, where sin increases, the grace abounds even more. I'm sorry, this is the last thing that I want to make to you. Who is the Jesus of the book of Revelation? There are today Seventh-day Adventists who are experts just to point fingers into others, but forgetting as they're pointing fingers to others, three fingers are pointing toward them. Unfortunately, they are far-sighted. They don't see those three fingers pointing to them. When we so many times using what the church is doing, we forget that we are part of that church. And who is the church? Who is the church? Our prophet clearly clarified. He says that the church, enfeebled and defective, though it be, is the only object on earth on which Christ bestows his supreme regard. He's constantly watching it with solicitude and strengthening it by his Holy Spirit. That's the church that you and me, we are a part of. So please, my last statement. The only hope of my church, that prophetically speaking is the church of Laodicea, is not in us, in our sinlessness. It's not in our strategy, in our goodness, what we can accomplish, what we can do. The hope of my church is only in Jesus Christ. He knows his people because he walks among them. He cares for them. As the church of God is facing the eschatological trial and looks forward to the second coming, the promise of the exalted Christ is still to them. Stop being afraid. I'm the first and the last and the living one. And I was dead, and behold, I'm living forever and ever. And I have the keys of death and Hades. And I have to stop here. Brothers, sisters, you will be in my prayers. You're wonderful leaders. I have been so much blessed by talking to you, by asking you questions about the place where you came from. May God bless you abundantly. Maybe we'll see each other again. If not, let us meet each other at the eastern gate of the heavenly Jerusalem when Jesus Christ. May God bless you abundantly.